Well, thank you, John, and welcome again, everyone, to a ThoughtRock presentation. So today's subject is really the subject of quick wins. And as always, to get us sort of kicked off, and then we'll go back and forth between John and myself. We'll start off here with just, what perspective and what definition of a quick win are we talking about today? So as the name may imply, this is something that's done early in a series of improvements. And the main two purposes that we're trying to do with quick wins demonstrates achievability of the grand plan. So if we're in an ITIL adoption and we're changing an organization in that direction, you want to make sure you keep people on board and this next one here committed as much as possible. And so this kind of flows along, we've done kind of a series of presentations in the last couple of weeks or months. How do you maintain commitment and buy-in? We did one of these about a month or 2 months ago. And again, you need to keep people committed. You need to keep them convinced of achievabilities. And the longer your journey, the more people lose focus and interest. So it is a long journey. But along the way, we need to identify quick wins, some type of early success which we can use to keep people motivated and involved along this long path. So a good example in my diagrams down here is this guy out in front here. That's a good quick win. If you're not starting for a long time, like the guy in the background, that's that's not a good definition of a quick win. But anyway, that's the perspective. And a quick win overall, as much as possible, we want to involve, I'll talk more about this later on, but our key stakeholders, anyone involved in having to carry out, we're in the process world, so carry out following or implementing some of our processes, all the way up to the stakeholders who are sponsoring and paying for these programs. So it is quite involved when you start laying out your project plans, but definitely the whole concept here, in line with the Deming principle, keep showing frequent improvements and that we're on the right track and moving in the right direction. Okay, so I don't know, John, if you want to add anything else to that definition, but that's what we'll start with as our sort of baseline. Let's go down to our, okay, great. Let's go down to our next slide then. So the next two slides are pretty much a repeat of the last couple of series of presentations as well, because this is the fundamental way of doing an ITIL adoption. So the continual service improvement approach, I've talked about this several times, and I'll just quickly run through it again. So you need to understand the big picture up at the top here. What's your vision and what are we actually trying to move towards? And this will tie together in a minute, because quick wins need to demonstrate that you're on the path to this vision. So, ITIL by definition is an organizational change. If you're adopting and changing from one state to another, and if you're doing an organizational change, you better have a good vision and understand a good roadmap over here about how to get there. So the standard steps: you do your baseline assessment of where are we now. That tells you the difference between the vision and the current state, and we talked about this in past sessions as well. Gives you your gap analysis. You can use the ITIL framework to compare this against, and then you come up with a very complicated set of plans, and it's a program of countless projects about how we're going to improve and actually get there. And it's right here, where I'll circle, and I'll put in the acronym QW. So here's where we want to also think about when we're trying to improve. You've got some very complicated things which are going to take a long time to do, but what can we do to demonstrate continued progression along the way and success in short steps? The other thing we want to keep in mind is that this is fundamental, these quick wins, to going through a round of this continual improvement cycle. Right? So we keep going and doing a step of improvement. We have some quick wins along the way to keep people engaged and motivated, and they see the change happening. That keeps the momentum going. we start moving forward. That gap analysis starts to shrink because we're starting to move up the ladder, and we just keep going around in this cycle. So taking it one step further then, here's my, my next slide. And again, I've been using this one the last couple of sessions as well. So again, you know, in trying to achieve and follow our roadmap, you need to have a high-level organizational vision, right? So you need to know what is it we're trying to move towards, and what are the big goals and objectives, the big markers, and break it down into a series of projects. So those who are project managers, you know the way it works. All these projects are trying to achieve a business outcome, all you know driven by the vision. And whenever I do this type of work and lay things out, you know, I call this being top-down directed. Right? You want to know exactly what your business outcomes are. It's driven from the top down. It's the best approach. And then we get into the sort of the middle phase here, which I call being process and ITIL framework facilitated. So once we have the project goals and objectives, we know what we're trying to achieve on a sort of project basis within that larger program, then I can go ahead and, you know, use my skills around the ITIL framework and the work that I've done, and I say, well, here's an integrated set of steps that we need to be successful with, my critical success factors. We need to do these things, and here's some key performance indicators to measure as we're moving along. And again, it's complicated work in putting together the ITIL process pieces as well as all the infrastructure background. So, so here's where you can, again, use your skill. And these tend to be big, complicated projects. So what we do is the next step down. I'm going to put another piece to this. So let's break that project down into a set of individual plans. And out of those plans, let's find out what are the quick wins which we can put along the way. You know, the plans themselves are going to be long and complex, but how can we get the quick wins to show, well, here's a quick way of showing us moving forward and letting everyone know that we're on track. So, so this is basically the, you know, a model, if you want to think about it, for planning out an ITIL adoption. And of course, you have to break it down. It becomes complex. And again, when you start breaking down your projects and plans, you want to think about the quick wins. And right here, the key thing about a quick win is to remember, for those not familiar with this acronym, and not that everyone should be, the ABCs, there's a lot of talk these days about, you know, the way to get process or any type of organizational change success out there, you need people to commit and buy in. So ABC stands for attitude, behavior, and culture. We want to make sure that the people involved are key stakeholders over here, that they're the ones that these quick wins are targeted to. And that's probably one of the most important things. I've seen a lot of efforts done where people look for quick wins on anything. But if it's not top-down directed up here, and if it's not focused at the right stakeholders here, you're doing you know, a great job, but no one cares. So you've got to be focused. It's got to be well-driven from a management and a project perspective. And again, by doing this, you will drive the attitude, behavior, and cultural change that you need to make happen to keep everything on track here to our ITIL roadmap. So let me pass this back a bit to John. And John, maybe you can just do a quick review of the last couple of presentations in which we've done. And I'll just jump down to this slide here.
Great. Yes. So what I thought we'd do, we realized that more than half of you are returning from the previous session. We'll have seen some of these slides, but I think we'll go really quickly through this just to once again set the context. For those of you who didn't have the luxury of attending our last session, those have been recorded, and you'll get a link at the end of this session if you want to go back and have a more detailed look at this. But it's important in the context of understanding how we get to quick wins to have a methodology, and I'll just recap very quickly the methodology that we've used in this case study. It's one that we use fairly frequently. So Graham talked about buy-in and executive or management priorities. So the first thing that we've done, if you recall, is we had an executive briefing section and I talked a bit about how we do that and how we leverage the CMMI scale to come up with the priorities in terms of which processes we want to improve and get that preliminary roadmap. And then click ahead there, Graham. So once we've got that, we've got buy-in from management, we've got some priorities set, then we do a detailed self-assessment, or use the self-assessment tools from the ITSMF actually to do a detailed assessment on the processes that we agreed are priorities with the management team and hopefully with the senior executive. And all of that documents in a much more detailed and clear fashion where we are today, what is our current reality with respect to the particular processes we've all collectively agreed to look at. And we've got a preliminary roadmap and project plan. So click ahead there, Brian. And just so we're clear for those of you who haven't seen this, that we use the CMMI model to our own satisfaction, if that's the right term. It's meant generally to go across all of IT in terms of a maturity measurement, but we actually find this scale very useful and we apply it process by process. So we'll assign one of these values to each of the processes we're looking at. Go ahead, Graham. And when we've done that, you'll get basically a report here. You'll notice that, as I mentioned last week, the scale is 0 to 5 and doesn't have pluses, minuses, but we find almost all of our organizations we work with, feel that it's helpful to sort of say, well, we're not really a 2, but we are kind of a 2 minus, we're more than a 1, so we do that. So click ahead, Graham. And from there we come up with a roadmap by each process and across the organization, and we're really looking and saying, where do we want to be 1, 2, or 3 years from now potentially? You can do it in shorter increments than a year if you want. For each of the processes that we're looking at, that's been agreed to as a priority, and that's how we build out the roadmap and the plan. And once again, note that not everything's going to necessarily get to a level 5 ever, because it doesn't necessarily make sense for your organization to have a fully mature process for each of the ITIL processes that you're working on. So, go ahead, Graham. So just a quick look. This is kind of what you look like or look at in terms of the processes that you want to focus on. In this case, incident change, config, problem, and service level management. And what year out from now do you want to achieve a certain maturity level? So keep going, Graham. Then we develop that roadmap, and getting down to today's topic, I'll review the sample I used last time, and then I'll launch into and show you another format and some other very specific examples of quick wins that we develop with clients. And now that you sort of have a very quick review of how we got there, I think it'll make more sense when I talk about how those got developed and communicated to the IT organization for implementation. So in this particular case, we were looking at configuration management, and one of the things we wanted to do, if you look at how we're going to proceed in making that process more mature, the first was implement quick wins. You'll notice the second thing on that slide was, it's okay, Graham, stay where you are, was that we wanted to wait, or we had to wait for the change management process to get more mature. So one of the things about quick wins is that you're looking for things you can implement that will improve the process you're working on, in this case, configuration management, while you may have to wait for a related process or integrated process, in this case, change management, to become more mature. So as we talked about last week, remember, the ITIL processes are obviously interrelated, and in this particular example, it became very clear that there's not too much point in going really far down the path of trying to implement configuration management if the change management process isn't fully in place to connect to it, because what's going to happen is your configuration databases are very quickly going to become obsolete and out of date. They have a data of integrity problem, basically. So flash ahead there, Graham, for me, if you would. So, year 1 to year 2, we had mapped out a plan, and we'll just skip over this, Graham, because we're really wanting today to talk about, skip ahead again, talk really about where the quick wins come from. So in this case, this is the output from the ITIL self-assessment tool. Each of the lines represents a different person or group of people within the organization. And people tended to rate things differently. The green line across the bottom is our rating as an external organization. And you know, we tend to see ourselves as unbiased. So if you look at where it says process capacity, yeah, feel free to draw and doodle there, Graham. What you'll see is that, you know, we rated it much lower than just about anybody else in the organization in terms of their capability and maturity. And, you know, the first reaction, rightly so, from the customer was, yeah, you want to rate things low because you're consultants and you want to come and have us pay you to fix them. That would be my natural first reaction too, but in fact it's not really the case. Because we're looking at quick wins, these are things that the organization can do themselves and don't need external resources to do. In this particular case, if you click ahead, Graham, what we said is, look, based on what we've seen, you're not close to having any kind of a federated database for your configuration management. You know, A, you don't own the software, and B, there's a whole bunch of other pieces that have to happen here. But what we could do is just somewhere on your intranet or even on your file server, create an area for all of this information to get stored in whatever disparate fashion it might be stored, a Word document, an Excel document, an Access database. It existed in this organization in a number of different ways. So somebody was already accountable for tracking all of the mobile devices like cell phones and that kind of stuff. Somebody else was responsible for all the desktops. Somebody else had all the printers and photocopiers. So we said, A, make sure those roles are clear and you know who's accountable for maintaining that data, and B, put that data in an area where the appropriate people have access, at least read access to it. And you've now improved the process, and then go one step further and add that link to where that data is to the change form. So there was, in this particular case, a change management process in place, not fully mature. So A, we're connecting to it, and B, we're actually helping it mature at the same time. So as you can imagine, we call this a quick win because A, it doesn't take very long, and B, it doesn't require a lot of resources. So click ahead, Graham. And by doing that, what we showed is how, you know, in terms of process capability and external integration, our assessment of how mature their process is would dramatically change just by taking that once. So that's a really quick recap of some of the things we talked about last week. Let's move ahead to some more examples from this week. And what I really want to show here is examples from a report that we generally use and the format that we generally use when we're working with a customer, and across a number of different processes, so you can sort of see what they are. And also I want you to see, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got there. So think back to the slides I zipped through really quickly. Remember, this is the culmination of an exercise that's happened, whether you do it internally or use an external consultant, or you know, even some contract labor to do it. It doesn't really matter. One of the things that we believe in firmly, because we've seen success with organizations, is that you generally don't want to have somebody come and do this to you. You know, you really want to do it in cooperation with some external resources, or do it yourselves, so that you are building understanding, capacity. You're also getting buy-in, and if you think back to a few sessions before, if you didn't have a chance to see it, check out Jill Donahue's session on the influencing behavior and assuasion staircase. So part of the reason that we really don't believe you can just outsource this and have somebody come back with a report and drop a binder on your desk with some documented processes is you will not, from what we've seen, facilitate change of behavior in your organization. So you have to participate. You've got to go down the path and follow this journey. The way we do that, when we get to the end or close to the end of this exercise, we're starting to build at the roadmap just before project plans, is to report across each of the processes that we're examining in this table format. So the first thing we do is kind of anchor it. On the left-hand side, you see best practice. So we'll pull out what we believe are the relevant comments with respect to the way ITIL describes the best practice. So remember, ITIL is not a specification, it's not a standard. It's essentially observational in nature. It's saying these are the things that organizations have who are well-functioning and fully mature. These are the things that they do. So in this case, right, change management activities are identified and assigned. Their documented change management process agreed to and followed by all divisions. So a couple of really key things in there. A, it's documented, and B, it's followed. But C, it's followed across the whole organization. And in some of our, I think the first session in this series, maybe, we were talking about change with Lisa Simons. And, one of the things that we were talking about in that discussion was, well, it's matured and it's good, but I don't have everybody following it yet. So that's the best practice. We also then, thinking back to Jill's techniques in terms of influence and behavior, we're looking at what have we achieved to date. So let's celebrate what we're doing well. And understand that, while we may look at it and say, oh, we'll never get there in this ITIL stuff, I don't know, and, does anybody really do this? Forget all that. Let's look at the things that we do well today because we are IT professionals and we're not stumbling around in the dark here. Then the next column is recommendations or quick wins. In this particular case, I just pulled out quick wins. You'll see some recommendations in a second. But what we're saying here essentially is update the current process. There was one, so not too hard. Include all the forms, current practices, and gain the agreement of division managers. We called that a quick win. In the case of this organization, their definition of quick was something that we could accomplish in 30 to 60 days. And so we saw that as a possibility. And then the next one is actually a kind of a combination of achieved and a recommendation. So the change owner and manager in the presentation or the brainstorming session that happened before this to come to consensus on what processes we're going to approve and what some of the outcomes were from the self-assessment, the team was able at that stage, in part because the CIO was there, to say, hey, you know what, we need to assign roles. That's one of the quick wins. So somebody got nominated and smiled and said, yeah, I think I'll do that. So go ahead and click ahead, Graham, and we'll watch for any questions if there are. So this case, I wanted to look at service level management. Once again, what's the best practice? Service catalog is agreed with customers and available to all the IT staff. And we're really looking then at what have we accomplished so far to date. You can see a couple of bullet points there, things that were done. On the right-hand side, you see a couple of quick wins suggested. And kind of we're trying to include some enthusiasm here, right? So identify a customer rep and begin to develop a service catalog for that customer. So pick one customer. Don't try to boil the ocean. Jump in. Get started. So by doing this for one customer, you're going to gain a bunch of experience, and you'll get some feedback, and you'll understand how much work is involved, and maybe identify some ways that you can do this more efficiently as you try to build out your entire service catalog. And develop a draft of all the services in consultation, in this case with what they call the ITT section. So across all of IT, it was a multifaceted, large organization. So then you'll see the next point, begin an awareness campaign to move to a culture of service orientation. That's not identified as a quick win. You'll notice the bullet point is different because that was something that we saw outside of that first sort of 30 to 60 day horizon. We said, yeah, that's going to take longer. So go ahead, Graham, move forward. So incident management, I'll move fairly quickly through. I think this might be my last one, just so that you can see that we go process by process, and we're using that same kind of format. What does the best practice say? What are we doing well today? What are the quick wins? And then intersperse those with what are the things we need to work on longer term. And this document then becomes also a master list, and in fact what we'll typically do, we'll pull all of the quick wins out of this, put them on a list, because as the organization rolls forward, we'll celebrate those quick wins as they're accomplished. So, got a couple questions here. Very good. Can you really change behavior? People do what they want to do. Absolutely. I had the pleasure of raising a couple of children. They were both now professional engineers, and many times in their life I changed their behavior, and yes, after they were 4 years old. Once again, if you want to know more about that, absolutely go back and look at Jill Donahue's session on influencing behavior, because it really talks about how that happens and can happen. And don't confuse changing behavior with changing personality. That's a different thing. But is it easy? Not always. Is it possible? Yeah, absolutely. Next question was, don't you have to implement a system change to help assist the DNA change? I'm not sure what the DNA change means.
I think that means cultural change.
As in dinucleic acid or whatever that stuff was I studied in high school. Yes, so potentially you do. We've done sessions before, and if anyone's interested, we can do them again, right? What comes first, is chicken and egg thing. So sometimes people will ask us, you know, what do you change first? What do you work on? The process, the system, or the behavior? And the answer is yes. So you really need to understand the interconnection between all of those things and have an integrated approach to how you implement. So you can't do one without the other, essentially, is what we've seen. Yeah, so you know, the clarification was that the DNA is the DNA, the person was referring to changing people, and by that I assume we mean changing behaviors. The other thing that I have seen, and we'll tend to work with organizations and help them sort of tackle this. In some cases, and it's not possible or probably not desirable in any organization, in some not possible, people will select themselves out as you continue down the path of implementing best practice and processes. So lots of people who are in our world who are IT professionals, and I count myself in this, so don't take it as overly critical, but lots of us like to be firefighters. We like to work in crisis mode, and we kind of have that hero mentality, and that's not just my opinion. It's pretty well documented. And some of those people will select themselves out if you change the organization and that behavior is no longer acceptable because they want to be cowboys or heroes or whatever sort of description you'd like to use there. And that's okay. In some cases, it's very hard because you may be in a union environment, or you may be in an environment where there's, you know, it's countercultural to do that. And I'm not suggesting that we want to weed people out by any means, but we do see it happen. There are lots of instances where we've seen organizations, as they move through process improvement and move to becoming more mature, that there is some degree of turnover because some people just don't want to, you know, work in that environment. Pick whatever analogy you want, you know, sports teams or whatever. A new coach comes in, and sometimes some of the players have to change because they don't want to follow the new system. So can you change all the people that change all their behavior? Not necessarily. Are there techniques to use to be successful to do that? Yes, there are. And does it always work? No. But the organization can make its decisions about how to manage and handle that. So I think, Graham, if you click on the next slide, we're into discussion. Finish my example. So yeah, and at this point, I guess I'll be quiet. I've kind of shown some of the examples that I've seen and used with customers and the things that they've done. And Graham, I know, you know, you've been involved in some of the projects where I haven't been, and I think there's two things. You've seen some interesting techniques for pulling out quick wins, and or implementing quick wins, and probably some other examples.
Yeah,
Maybe you can tell us about those.
Yeah, that's perfect, because it actually ties back into sort of a technique that we've evolved over a bit of time, and it kind of ties into everything we've been talking about. I'm going to go back a slide actually while we have this discussion. So on this this messy slide here, when I try and go through and we're trying to get a project plan put in place, and then we're trying to think about how we're going to implement it and get compliance amongst people as we go through. Very much this slide, although it's messy, it gives you kind of a little formula you can follow, and I call it the continual improvement workshop. It is a technique that you can use within this model. So again, you always want to know your top-down direction, and one of the key things to getting top-down direction, I forget how many weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3, we'd done an executive overview. And it doesn't have to be necessarily an executive overview. What you're doing is you start off by doing a problem-finding exercise. And so everything involves people. A key thing for quick wins is that if you want to keep this attitude, behavior, and cultural ability to have people follow the solutions of these quick wins and actually buy into them, they need to be part of the source of coming up with these. So if you assemble a group of people in a room and you give them some clear directions, you have to be a good facilitator. You want to say what's not working and what's really causing the business a lot of pain. So you can start off at the executive level. They'll tell you the big business drivers that aren't working. And then you can boil it down. If I jump around a bit, we can come in and do an assessment and say, well, in your overall framework and what you're describing, maybe what's a quick win that you might want to see some improvement in is this problem process, which you really don't have anything happening, and it would really help to iron out a lot of these repeat issues that are coming into the service desk. So that might be a high-level way of doing a quick win for just identifying what needs to be done at an executive level. But sooner or later, you're going to have to come up with a plan of how do I implement this and what needs to be done. And again, going back to my slide number 4, just now assemble another team, the team of implementers, plus some of the business stakeholders and so on, and say, okay, well, let's brainstorm what are really some of the repeat problems, and give me some examples, what's not working. So there's a lot of brainstorming sessions, and this helps to identify and come up with a list of problems. And then with the technique that I use, you go through and you say, great, let's jot all these problems down that have come out from these brainstorming sessions, and then let's go through and start ranking them. And you use a bubble chart to bubble it out and say, well, the ones that everyone is saying has the most impact on them, they bubble up to the top, and these are the things that we need to address. So because I've included my stakeholders from, again, not just one end. You want to have some business level stakeholders, some IT stakeholders. You're facilitating things with your process knowledge, right? That's where you say, well, here's some of the key success factors, and how are we doing with this? So you bubble up that list, you prioritize your problem-solving list, and then you say, okay, great, well, here's some things that we need to tackle. And you keep this stakeholder group together, and then you go at it another way, saying, well, I can come up with a solution, but more likely you'll buy into and follow a solution that comes up out of the group here. And again, use the power of numbers, or strength in numbers, where people can help solve problems. So the group goes ahead and you facilitate them again to say, start just brainstorming for solutions, and you start getting, there's a scribe, and you start documenting all these things. You put it into a list again and say, great. We need a configuration database. Oh, and we need a service catalog. And we need some service level agreements. So those would not be examples of quick wins, because all of those things take a lot of time to put together. So again, you go back, and here's where you use your ITSM skills, and you take some strategic approaches, and John had mentioned a bit of it too. You change your approach. You say, well, we can't do everything all at once. That's not a quick win. How can we break it down? let's maybe pick a specific customer area or service area, and let's try and come up with a solution based around that smaller entity. And we'll use it to then flesh out the larger plan for the overall ITSM sort of plan we have. So you keep this group active, and you have them break it down until finally you come up with subsets of all of your solutions. And you say, well, here's something we can do right away. We could establish out of the service desk area, we'll dedicate someone to be doing problem reports and looking for repeat type of incidents. And we're just trying to identify those things which we'll start to investigate. So that could be an example of a quick win that comes out of this. It's something you can do very quickly right away. You should have reporting. We're assuming we have reporting capability already at our hands. We just have to kind of put someone on the project and enable them to start just doing the first step to saying, here's repeat incidents, and these are the things we're going to focus on. We'll pick the top one, and then we'll figure out how do we then try and come up with a solution around it using problem management as my example.
So question, Graham.
That's the technique.
My question that came up is, what level of training do you recommend that the participants have before participating in those brainstorming sessions?
Well, the level of training, everything is based upon how you know your stakeholders. If it's about trying to implement an improvement within a specific area of IT, and it doesn't have to be a specific ITIL process area, you may need no training at all. Because again, you're not trying to, we use the term not trying to boil the ocean here. What you're trying to do is say, let's problem solve to tell me what's not working for you, what's bugging you. And you don't need training for that. People know what's bugging them or what they're not able to do. Right? So that's the first phase, to try to figure out what are the problems out there, and you keep breaking it down from that top business level priority list of saying, here's things I want you and IT to fix. Right? So you assemble your teams, you problem solve, and say, here's the things that we see on an operational basis not working. And then you take that same group and you say, great, so how do you fix these things? And if you're facilitating, the facilitator has to know what they're doing. They're the ones who need the big picture, and they need to make the decision, do I need to train people on these or not? And if I use my problem example, you might choose, a while back last year, we created a problem-solving workshop for one of our customers, because they want to get the big message out there that here's how you do good problem solving, and here's how it fits into a problem management framework. So very quick 2-hour workshop. You might want to do that to give people the background, to say here's the big picture of what we're trying to come up with solutions within. Or you might say that's not necessary, and then you just go ahead and again get the group working together and saying here's the prioritized list of problems that we came up with, and we all agree these are the ones that need to be fixed. Showing success in them with quick wins is a key thing. And then you give them the task again, so come up with the solutions. People will buy into solutions that come from them. So it's kind of a double.
Great, thanks, Graham.
Double task there, but yeah, always
Right.
know your stakeholders and assess the situation.
Right. Just a couple things, Graham. We're just a time check. We've got sort of 5 or 6 minutes. We should probably wrap things up. And I do have another, I think it's a comment, but maybe a request. It's, if systems are good, then the process has to be on track or have the correct game plan. ITIL game plan or playbook would be great to discuss. So maybe you can comment just a little bit. I mean, my comment would be for sure. And as we talked about, there's that kind of connection between process systems and people's behaviors. And one of the things, from a playbook perspective, if you were involved last week or want to go back and look at that, we do have a methodology where we really come up with a roadmap and all the way even through to a project plan. So we know which processes we're working on and in what order and what priority and what our target dates are. So if that's what you meant by a playbook, then absolutely agree that that is important, and there are some methodologies for developing those that are important to follow. Sorry, Graham, go ahead. I don't know if you had one more example you might want to talk about quickly.
Well, it was only one I was, that's more of the technique which I was talking about, and then, any number of examples can come out, which we've done from that technique. Even a simple thing, like I know we've done this before, and, we had one workshop where it was just a small thing, but we had to show improvement at the service desk because customers were getting quite frustrated where they would call in not so much in a support issue, but in the problem-solving session, and from our management top-down directives that we need to show that we're more professional within IT. Customers were calling in, and every time they call in, the analyst, to no fault of the analyst, would then try and handle the request. Again, it wasn't a support issue, and a lot of time was spent and fulfillment of those requests took quite a while because the bulk of time was spent trying to figure out who do I contact beyond the service desk who can fulfill this type of request. And it's quite common in a lot of service desks that are fairly new or not mature, and they don't have all of the matrices to say here's the type of request in my service catalog, it links to this type of service, and therefore it goes into this support group within IT. So same type of thing, when we took that example, and it became one of the big things that bubbled up in terms of the problems that management saw and needed to be solved. Well, then again, we took the stakeholder groups, we assembled them and said, here's the issues, and we prioritized our problems, and now let's problem solve it. So let's have a brainstorming session and say, what are the things we need? And of course, all the big things come out. World would be great if we had a configuration database, agreements, service catalogs, but none of those currently exist, and it's not a quick win to try and say we need that first. So, we keep breaking it down. So, okay, here's what we need. Everyone thinks they're done. And then as a facilitator, you go back and you say, well, break it down again because, we need smaller cycles here. And you keep driving it until finally someone says, okay, well, the solution was, let's go and run a report off of our tickets for the last 2 months, and let's find out the basic type of request. They didn't have good categorization, but they were going to start work with it. Here's the top 2 or 3 types of requests that are coming in. Pick one, right? That's an easy thing to do, and quick wins are based upon easy things you want to do. So pick one of these requests, and then come up with a service model for it. Right? So we aren't going to try and boil the ocean. We're going to pick one small thing. Running the report and coming up with the example is a very quick win. Taking that and looking at the history of tickets, they did have a good history database, and figuring out who were the people who were involved in supporting it last time. Well, let's just go and formally put them into a matrix, and let's choose a very simple way of every time a request comes in, check against these types of parameters and definitions to see if you're matching to this sample type of request. And by the way, there's a support matrix. Right? So something you can implement within a month. And now you can start tracking and showing success. And you want to market that success because that's the whole key of a quick win. You want to show at the management level, the customer level, and within your stakeholders, for attitude, behavior, and culture, we're on the right path. We like the ITIL framework model that we're going to be using for our big vision. And here's an example of how it can help in a very quick way. And now I can learn from that and expand it out to other types of services.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham. Well, we're about a little after 12:45, so I think we should wrap up, see if there are any more questions. Next week, we are talking about educational strategies for ITIL programs, so feel free to join us and invite anybody else who you think might like to participate in that discussion. We'll be talking about the things that we've seen happening in the industry and different strategies for implementing ITIL training, maximizing the return on your investment for training dollars. So please join us next week for that. And unless there are any other questions, I think we'll wrap things up. Thanks very much for attending.
Okay. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, everyone.